Good morning, everybody. Welcome to It's All Right with Suzette, a half-hour show about authors and their works. And today we have a very interesting book to explore by Dr. Daniela Gitlin, a psychiatrist with over 30 years of experience in New York State. Her new book is a book to the psychiatric field, but it is also a user-friendly guide about how the right and the left brain work and how writers and creatives can also use this information to further their own creative process. Her book was published by Norton & Norton, a powerhouse publishing house in academic circles, and the title of her book is Doorknob Bombshells in Therapy: The Deadline, the Brain, and Why It's Important to End on Time. Welcome to the show, Daniela. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Suzette.
Well, your book is very interesting. It was an easy read for a layperson like me outside of the professional psychiatric circles. And let's talk a little bit about what is a doorknob moment in psychiatry.
Okay, a doorknob moment is actually a clinical phenomenon that occurs in lots of different settings, not just psychiatry. It basically occurs when the session is technically over and the patient at that moment releases a critical piece of information that's new and often quite upsetting. And they break down after having said it. So that puts the clinician, the therapist, on the spot. What should we do? Should we help them process that new piece of information right then and run over and potentially be late for the next patient? Or should we end on time? And to me, that always felt like, sorry, we just don't have time to pack that wound. See you later. It just felt so unkind. So I did some research on, how to handle this in the literature, and I was shocked to find that there was nothing really helpful about how to deal with this phenomenon. It's well known. It's been discussed extensively, and the majority of the discussion has centered on how to run over. It was not about ending on time. So I was in the middle of another project, my first book actually, and I had this aha moment where I realized that the patient and the clinician are in relationship with each other in the same way that the right and left hemispheres are in relationship with each other to create a new project. So the therapy or the clinical work is an ongoing creative process. And that's kind of the framework in which I developed this idea. And it is important to end on time. Duke Ellington is famous for quoting, "I don't need time, I need a deadline." And that triggered off another research project. I researched what the differences are between the right and left hemispheres.
That is so fascinating. And tell us a little bit about, okay, so now you have this person ending a session, hand on the doorknob, and they drop this bombshell, this incredibly emotional, disturbing bombshell. And your premise is it's better to end on time. And what are the benefits of ending on time?
Well, it's not even better. It's mandatory to end on time. If you want to facilitate the patient or make it easier for the patient to release new information that is necessary for the treatment to move forward, especially if it leaves them vulnerable or ashamed, and they don't want to deal with you after they drop that bombshell. And that's been well understood too, that, patients release this information and scat because they just don't want to deal with you. Well, there's science behind that too. And it has to do with how the creative process works. So if I can go into that if you want.
Yes, but let's just focus a little bit on the patient. Frankly, it must be very disturbing to you as the clinician to see this person so upset, so emotionally distraught, giving brand new information that they've never given you before.
Yeah.
And it must be very, very difficult to suddenly say, well, we'll have to continue this next week.
Yes, it's awful. But I have a new strategy. Since I came up with this construct, and I'm convinced clinically that it is necessary to end on time, that it is therapeutic to end on time, because that's what enables the patient to release the information. They trust you to end on time. They more likely to say whatever it is they're afraid to say. So that is actually the operating premise. They wouldn't have dropped that information if I was loosey-goosey about ending on time. So now I prepare patients for that moment. I tell patients that there's going to come a time when the session ends and you find yourself blurting out something that leaves you feeling extremely upset. And the thing we have to do with that is wrap up so that you can leave gracefully, so you don't have to go crying through the waiting room. And we'll pick it up at the next session, because we both need time to process that information. And this, again, has to do with how the left brain works. It's necessary for me as a clinician to not respond without thought, because what I say might not be helpful. I too need that time to think it through.
Wonderful. That's great advice, Daniela. And now let's move on to how the right and the left brain work together, or perhaps work against each other, and how you facilitate an alliance. And you also made, and when you get into it, I know that in your book you talk about how the clinician works as the left brain and the
Mhm.
patient is the right brain counterpart, and that you come together in a very kind of healing way to bring about a beneficial insight or change. And then from there, I'm really eager to talk about how this process translates to
Mhm.
creatives like writers, artists,
Mhm.
all of that. But first, give us an explanation of the right and left brain.
Okay, so this is very simple, okay, to the point of being much too generic. So, with that caveat, there has been research done that reveals, with the research was done with patients that had intractable seizure disorders. And the corpus callosum, which is the band of neural tissue that connects the two hemispheres, was cut in those patients to see if that would stop the seizures. And in fact, it did. And what they learned was that the right and the left hemispheres operate very differently. You can live your whole life with just one hemisphere, but the life you live with the right hemisphere is going to be very different than the life you live with your left. In a normal person, in a normal situation, the two hemispheres work together, and the corpus callosum's function is actually to keep them away from each other so that they can each do their job. So what is the job of the right hemisphere? Well, the right hemisphere interfaces with reality. It interfaces with the outside world. It is the conduit with whatever is happening outside of ourselves. So the right hemisphere is very comfortable with anything that's new. I mean, that's basically what it does, what it deals with. It's constantly new information. So that information is unfiltered. The right hemisphere lives in an ever-present now. It does not have a sense of, discrete intervals. However, the right hemisphere is in charge of anything that we make that has a narrative arc, a beginning, middle, and end. And look, the appointment is a narrative arc. It has a beginning, middle, and end. So, what is the function? And also the sense of time of the right hemisphere. It's continuous. There's no interruption. So, what does the left hemisphere do? Well, the left hemisphere has the speech centers. So, it's in charge of our dictionary and our syntax, and it interprets the world relative to what it's seen before. The left hemisphere rejects what it hasn't seen before. It focuses solely on familiarity, what it recognizes, and that's a very valuable function. It helps to it's self-serving. We will extract from the environment what is familiar and what we recognize and what we need, and that's part of why it's efficient. It's a predictive process. Our brains predict what's going to happen ahead of time so as to efficiently take take the action that keeps us alive. That's really the brain's function, is to keep us alive. So the right hemisphere sends all this undifferentiated information to the left. The left picks out what it recognizes and puts words on it and incorporates it into memory. And this is part of how we remember. We need to put a story or words onto something that's happening. Otherwise, we can't retrieve it. It just disappears into all of that undifferentiated information. And so when it comes down to it, the patient functions as the right hemisphere in the treatment relationship because they are the source of new information. They are always putting out new information. And the clinician's job is to do what the left hemisphere does, to analyze, to put it into some kind of familiar pattern, and then to feed it back to the patient at a time when they can hear it and take it in. And if you're working well with somebody, that moves the treatment forward. And what does that mean? That the person learns something new about themselves that enables them to deal with situations that in the past they have not dealt with healthfully. And so therapy doesn't actually alter what you're doing. It just changes the choices that you make based on how you're processing the information with the therapist. And what else did I leave anything out here?
Well, I think that this explanation really sheds a lot of enlightenment into the creative process also, because I know that when I read your book, I had a real aha moment because it explained to me why I might have these great creative ideas, a new insight, a new writing approach, and yet the hobgoblins of my left analytical brain are unfamiliar with this new information, will constantly sit there and go, well, that was stupid. That's never going to work. What are you trying to say? You don't
Oh,
know what you're doing. And
get it.
and when now that I've learned from your book that the right is always comes up with new information, and that the left will initially reject anything that is unfamiliar, it is such a reassuring
Yeah.
kind of mindset to know it's not me. I think that there are a lot of creatives always second guessing themselves. Well, I have these doubts. Why do I have these doubts? It must be bad. So
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
really great. That's really great.
So this is how you use this idea, okay? The narrative arc, the session, or your timed writing interval, whichever, has a beginning, middle, and end. And if you didn't have that endpoint, the patient would not deliver that new information. And if you didn't have that endpoint when you're drafting something new, you would not finish, you would not close that arc. So as counterintuitive as it seems, if you're writing to a timed interval, and I suggest that anybody who's drafting anything new, write to a timed interval. 25 minutes seems to be the operational ideal. Your brain can creatively produce for 25 minutes. Then you take a 10-minute break and you do it again. Or if you're on a roll, you reset. And, at one point, that ding will happen and you'll go, okay, I'm done. And that process is not about stepping back and analyzing what you're writing and saying, oh, this is good. Oh, this works. No, it's one word at a time. And then the time is done and you put that draft away, just like the patient puts that session away and walks away from it. And I, as a clinician, also walk away from it until I can deal with that draft or with that patient as if with more objectivity, without that automatic negative rejection of anything that's new. Anytime you're drafting something new, there's going to be original material in there that your left hemisphere will not recognize. And since it has language, it will shout in your ear, oh, that sucks. That's no good. Correct that. Get rid of that. So how do you deal with that? You put that draft away. You don't look at it for a day or two or a week or two or whatever, because that time interval allows you to read that draft as if somebody else had written it. It's not yours anymore. And the great Linda Berry, cartoonist and MacArthur Genius Fellow, talked about that automatic rejection as, well, you have a newborn baby. You're not going to look at it and go, yuck, and throw the baby out the window because it doesn't look like the adult you want it to look like. You're in the beginning phase, and you don't want any of that automatic dismissal of what your left hemisphere doesn't recognize. And the right hemisphere isn't analytical. It's in the now every moment. So you can't make a decision or a judgment about what you're writing as you're writing it. You have to just keep putting one word after another. And this is what, the successful writers say. Stephen King, one word after another. Neil Gaiman, one word after another until you end. And then you look at it and you go, oh, a week later, oh, that's not nearly as bad as I felt it was at the end of the when I was writing it. So you have to really ignore that constant nattering. And it's not going to go away either. It's just the way our brains work. The deadline is what enables your right hemisphere to put out. And if writers or creatives don't have a deadline, they often just keep procrastinating and tweaking and, perfectionistically destroying the life of their work because you can never satisfy the left brain. It's just always going to find fault with whatever it is you're doing. So that's the reason a deadline is helpful to, say, journalists or writers or artists, that have a show coming up. They have to put their work out into the public and take that risk of rejection. And the deadline enables them to get over that hump. I mean, same with my book. I had a deadline. I had to meet it.
Yes, yes. And what I really like about your suggestion is that I know for myself, when I want to write something, I have a lot of resistance because I think to myself, oh gosh, do I really have an hour, 2 hours to devote to this? But if I say to myself, sit down, just do 15 minutes, whatever's on your mind, just
Yeah.
write on the paper and then let it go. And I find that when I'm in that creative zone and I know that the deadline, I'm only giving myself 15, 20 minutes, it will often go longer with my permission because the deadline is kind of the easy out. I can go out, I can go away anytime. And that really kind of is a Jedi mind trick.
Well, it's freeing. It's freeing. You don't have to do anything except get the words down. I used to be tortured writing first drafts, and I loved editing. Now I have the reverse. I find editing, an endless decision-making process, whereas writing the draft, I'm just putting words out there. I'm not making any judgments. It's very freeing. And so just as an example, when I started using this method of, timed writing for 25 minutes at a time when I was working on my first book, I wrote 13 chapter drafts in 13 days. And it was not hard. It was easy. What was hard then was the revisions. I mean, I worked on those chapters for a couple years. The shaping process is very different from the release process. And if you understand that, it takes a lot of the torment out.
I like it. I like it. Let's release the torment. Now, Doorknob Bombshells in Therapy. This was actually your second book.
Yeah.
And your first book, 5 years after you wrote your first book, Practice, 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 This Psychiatrist's Life. You published that in 2020. And 5 years later, recently, it won an award. After the fact, you received the 2025 Positive Impact Award from Infinite Generations Book Contest. So let's back up a little bit and talk about your very first book, Practice, Practice, Practice. What did that book feature?
That book, well, I've been writing essays about patient interactions for many years. And I always felt this urge to share what I was learning from these interactions, not necessarily in an academic way, but, how the process of the interaction facilitates change and enlivens both of us, the therapist and the patient. So what was the hook? I just couldn't find the way in. And I was reading this one chapter that I had written, and I noticed, and this is the aha moment, I noticed that I had glossed over a mistake I had made in that session. And yet, that was the only interesting thing in that essay, that mistake. And simultaneously, I encountered this quote from Kurt Vonnegut about plots that people like. And he called this man in hole. He said, man falls in a hole, digs himself out. People love that plot. And I thought, that's my day. That's my working experience. And it transformed how I approach the book. So every chapter features some gaffe I make as a therapist or some ambush that the patient, assaults me with, or I'm out in the community and I'm, dealing with a patient in the context of our children. And I also tried to be amusing. I mean, one of the things that any clinician does is read articles to keep up. And so I have a few faux science articles with my alter ego. I am trapped and MD. And so I comment on various, social issues that are important to me through that venue. It was just a compilation really of 25 years of clinical work, and it spans the arc of my growth as a therapist. Although that was completely, I didn't approach the project with that was something that actually occurred, and that's one of those happy accidents about creative work. I started out, there's a few chapters of my youth, so you know what kind of person, I basically was as a kid. Then the training years, and then 25 years of clinical work, post-training years. And, there's a reason that medical or, clinical practices are called practice, because you're always practicing. You never really arrive.
Well,
And that's part of the joy.
absolutely. And your first book, Practice, 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 is so much about personal stories. And I find that it was refreshingly candid because people really do learn from mistakes, the
Oh, yeah.
insight, the hard-won wisdom that comes from, I think I would have done this differently. And also, it gave me such an insight into a psychiatric practice. For example, I used to think that you would go and then you would figure out what your problem was, you'd get your advice, and then you would leave, and that would be it. And then I've discovered
Only.
that a lot of excellent psychiatrists and counselors oftentimes have patients for years. And you explained to me it's because their condition, their medical condition, may never change, but they need medication and they need help with modifying their behavior, insights into interacting all the time with other people. And I found that to be so enlightening. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our stuff, right? Does it ever really go away? No. People show up in treatment because the way they're dealing with conflicts and interactions, or even their own management of their own illness, is not working. They're getting trouble, they're getting sicker, they're getting fired, they're getting divorced, whatever. People only show up in treatment when they've reached the breaking point. Nobody wants to admit that there's a problem, right? The hidden agenda behind admitting you have a problem is you have to admit you're mortal. You have to admit that, you don't have unlimited time. And a therapy is really designed to kind of wake you up to that. And so that you can make different choices. And being able to medicate is a wonderful tool. I love that I have that in my toolbox, because you can't really do therapy with someone who's burdened with significant symptoms. And so once those symptoms lift, I work with people to help them undo bad habits from living with those symptoms, and to understand better why they react in certain situations the way they do. And we all have these patterns. It's not like I'm exempt, which is part of what I reveal in the book. I have my own knee-jerk reactions to things. And this is why it's important to end on time so that I, as a clinician, have the time to think through, was it me or was it them? What did I bring to this engagement? What was their contribution? And it's always any kind of and the therapy or clinical engagement is always about the patient. It's not like in real life where there's supposed to be a back and forth, a sharing of the obligation.
Yes.
In therapy, the clinician's agenda is always to think what would be of best benefit to the client? How should I respond that would be most beneficial to them?
Yes. And we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to know, how did you feel when you received notice of your award?
Well, it was really thrilling because I did win another award about a year out from publication. And unfortunately, my book launched 2 weeks before the pandemic shut down. So that book got no fanfare, which is sad because I really think that it's a good book. I even think that 5 years from 5 years after. That's what I saw this contest cross one of my social media feeds. I went, yeah, my book is about contributing to health and wellness and people's, positive experience of life. And so I submitted it on a whim. I was shocked. That it came in a winner in the health and wellness category. But on the other hand, it was very affirming. Yeah, it's a good book. It still works 5 years out.
Yes, practice, practice, practice. I love that it's still getting recognition even now. And your doorknobs moments is it's unbelievable. I read it. I found it really easy to understand. And it was such a great insight into how the mind works, not just for counseling, but how it works in the creative process. Now,
Yeah.
how can people buy your book, Daniela, and where can they get in touch with you?
Well, I blog at www.danielagitlin.com. One L in Daniela, Daniela, Gitlin, Gitlin.com. And you can get my first book on Amazon, and it also comes in print or ebook. And you can get my Doorknob Bombshells. You should go to the Norton website because they often have a sale. And they also list indie booksellers that you can get the book through, which I would support not supporting Amazon at all, if at all possible. So www.
Go ahead, give us Norton.
I think Norton Mental Health. I actually let me pull this out. I don't actually go to Doorknob. It's Doorknob. I'm sorry, I'm blocking. But go to the Norton Mental Health website, www.norton.com, and just put the name of my book in, and it'll pop up.
Well, it has been an enlightening session with you, Dr. Daniela Gitlin. And I thank you for being with us and enlightening us on not only how to make the most of a good counseling session, but also how the creative process works. I found it very reassuring because my hobgoblins can be very critical.
Yes, definitely.
And now I realize, well, that's what they do. They're not familiar with a new concept. And so, yeah, of course, they're going to be naysayers.
I mean, it's a great thing to walk away from that, stopwatch and walk away from all of that negative nattering that's in your ear as patients feel relieved to leave the session, having dropped their bomb, and they don't have to deal with me.
Exactly.
And so, do I run over a little bit to help them pull themselves together? Yes, I do. I do use a few minutes to help people, dab their eyes and blow their noses and, leave in a more put together state. But I don't process anything with them, as you shouldn't when you have a first draft.
And now, doctor, we have to end on time.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
It's been wonderful having you, and thank you all for coming in and watching Dr. Daniela Gitlin talk about her 2 books, and we'll see you the next time on It's All Right with Suzette.